Well, welcome everybody, and welcome Phil. So glad you're here to tell us about your book, and want to thank you guys for taking a little bit of your evening to come hear about this. And so I'm Justin, pastor of Velocity Church, and just have a few questions I'll be asking Phil, and we'll get to know about his book together. So if you would, Phil, we're here to talk about your book, Zebedee and Sons Fishing Company, Business Advice from the Bible. And I'm fascinated by this topic, not only just why you wrote it, but the detail you went into writing it. But in a nutshell, for all of us who may be hearing about it for the first time, tell us what this book is about. Okay.
On a surface level, the book is a story about a man by the name of Zebedee. Now, in the book, Zebedee is talked about in one paragraph of every chapter. But the story is really about him. The bigger story is Zebedee is a business owner, and he had a fishing company back in about, 30 AD on the Sea of Galilee. And one morning he was unloading his fish, and this guy comes along. And his company had 4 main partners and then had some other employees in it. But one early morning, a guy comes along and talks to 2 of his partners, Peter and Andrew, and says, "Come with me, we'll fish for men." And then he goes down to Zebedee's boat, where he's fishing with his 2 sons, James and John, and says, "Come with me, I'll make you fishers of men." And then the 5 of them walk off. And when I read that story, and I've heard sermons about it, and I love the story, but what really struck me about that was here's Zebedee setting in the boat by himself, full of fish, nobody's hung up the nets, he's got to put the boat away, he's all by himself. And I thought, Jesus just put Zebedee out of business. And the more I thought about that, I could really empathize with, the bank calling your loan, your business partner deciding that he or she wants to go do something else, one of your employees steals your list of clients and opens his own business. A whole list of things is the exact same scenario that Zebedee was facing at that point in time. Now we know Zebedee is a devout Jew. We know Zebedee's wife is a follower of Jesus, ultimately. So we can presume that Zebedee is a faithful man. So what I wanted to do is think in terms of what would Zebedee do when what did Zebedee do when all that happened? In terms of first century Galilee, first century Judea. And of course the Bible didn't exist back then yet. The New Testament didn't exist. And so then how does the New Testament play into what Zebedee, being a Jew, would have done? And then most of the book is about how we relate that to our lives today, our business lives. And so what I did is I picked 12 topics and just really drilled down deep into each one of them about what I thought a man by the name of Zebedee would have done when that happened to him.
Now, you alluded to this a little bit, talking about this thought that came to mind with Jesus just put Zebedee out of business. But what's interesting about this book to me is, one, you're a civil engineer by trade, you own Land Plan Engineering, you're the president of that company. I don't know too many engineers who write books, at least most of them maybe textbooks, not business advice books. So what was it that inspired you to write this book?
I've long been a student of the Bible, but I've always been a collector of business advice books. I got Patrick Lecondi's, I've got Friedman's book on The Earth is Flat. Everybody's got a copy of Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. I've got a collection of faith leaders who have attempted to write business books, but their perspective is kind of peripheral. Very few Christian business books were actually written by business people. They've used consultants and people to help them write it, but so very few people have made that connection. And so what I've seen a lot of, and I heard this very early on from some people, they said, the only book you need to run your business properly is the Bible. And I thought, okay, I don't get that, and the more I heard that and the more I thought about that, what they were talking about is, okay, be honest, do the 10 Commandments, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, that kind of stuff. But that's really not business advice. That's life advice. That's stuff that, whether you're in business or whatever you're doing, and they were trying to put it in a business context. And I can do better than that. I can find, there's real solid business stories in the Bible that we could rely on. And that, the other one that's important to me is that even if you don't believe the Bible is inspired, and even if you don't believe it is the book that you need to live your life by, it is, without question, a book that is just full of phenomenal advice. I mean, if you want to just have good principles, if you want to just run your business well, read the Bible and just mine out of it just the good business advice. I think you're going to get hooked. That's kind of hooked into the rest of it. But it is just a book full of great advice.
So you're a business owner. I'm a pastor. We have a number of different people here who may be self-employed, maybe students, maybe they own their own business. Who's going to benefit from this book? A lot of times when you're writing a book, or like when I'm writing a sermon, I'm thinking about the people that I'm speaking to. Mm-hmm. So in your mind, who are the people that you're speaking to? Who's this book going to benefit?
I started writing the book thinking my audience was going to be Christian business owners, somebody that already had a familiarity with the Bible, and that they could hang on to this book and couple it with the Bible and just learn how to put the two together to run their business. And that's where I started. Three of my favorite magazines are Wired magazine. I don't know if anybody reads that. Fast Company is another one, and then Inc. Because those are current today business environment, and I used a lot of business examples from them. But those magazines are all tailored towards entrepreneurs. And what is it? 92% of all employed people in the United States today work for a company of 10 employees or less. Wow. And so, we have this world out there of these very small business companies of 5 people, 7 people, 11 people, who don't have the budgets to bring in consultants to help them run their business and give them good advice, and don't have the wherewithal or the time to really structure, like, you read in all the big business guru books, Jack Welch and Good to Great had a $1 billion budget to do the stuff he did. And you can't, that doesn't shrink down to anybody else's business. You just can't. And so what I really thought is, this is really a book that these small businesses can take and just get some good, sound advice on how to deal with employee issues and how to negotiate contracts and how to handle money and things like that it just gives them a good framework for that.
So you said it's like in your mind, you're thinking about entrepreneurs, you're thinking about small business owners, business leaders. Do you say that this book is just for those people, or would other people benefit from it?
If you think about it, and I mention this frequently in the book, is that we're all in the business of business. My wife Stephanie is getting her car repaired. She's negotiating that. She's trying to figure out the insurance. She's trying to deal with all those issues. Those are business issues, and so at some level, everybody is dealing with a business in some level of context. And so this just gives you a framework, especially, making business decisions doesn't necessarily mean you're employed or employing people.
So let's get into the book a little bit, because I know we're all probably wanting to know what's written and what's it contained. You had mentioned how you broke it up into 12 different topics. So how did you, when you're thinking about writing almost a business manual, if you will, how do you decide what topics to cover, which ones to leave out? Because I'm sure knowing a little bit about you, knowing your company, and even just reading lots of books, there's so many things you could choose from. how did you narrow it down to 12, and how did you decide on these 12?
So I went to seminary and got my master's in theology. And that was a 22-month nonstop online program where I was writing 20 to 30 page papers every week, nonstop. And so I'd get in to the office at 5 o'clock in the morning and I would write, or I'd stay late, or I'd go in early Saturday morning and write. Well, after 2 years of doing that, I didn't want to lose that, because that's a hard-earned habit to get to. So I wanted to keep that fresh. And so what I decided I would start doing is, just on my own, I'm going to write about the problems I was dealing with that day. And I'd take something that was just bouncing around in my head and causing me some kind of concern. And you know, one of the first chapters I wrote was on benefits, because we were in the process in our company of looking at, do we need to change the benefit package of what we're providing our employees? And so we were right in the middle of that conversation, and I thought, you know, what does the Bible say that I need to give my employees at a minimum? And so I just drilled down into that and really dug into what the Bible said. The second one is a conversation I had with somebody about being open on Sunday. You know, should I, as a Christian businessman, require or even allow my employees to work on Sunday? And so, you know what, I'm going to find out what the Bible says about that. And so I drilled down into that, and so what I had 4 or 5 of these chapters pulled together. Zebedee hadn't even shown up yet in the picture. And I was trying to decide, what am I going to do with these chapters I've written? Because I was thinking, you know, maybe there's a magazine I could submit them to, or another author might take them and put them in his book or her book. And one Sunday morning, I was listening to this young pastor preach, and he offhandedly made the comment about Zebedee and Sons Fishing Company. And the minute he said that, I thought, that is exactly the title of my new book. And at that moment, I was writing a book. And and so all of those chapters were issues I was dealing with through the period I was writing this book. I'm now doing a blog, and I have probably got, for the same process of writing about issues I'm dealing with in my company, I have probably got 12 more chapters that if I wanted to do another book, and I'm not saying I'm going to, but there'll be blog material. I mean, they're going to be showing up on there as material for that.
Now, one of the things I love about this book is the way it's written, how you start with kind of the premise, you tell this little parable about Zebedee, then you get into scripture and the principle that's being applied here. How do you want people to read this book, though? The way it's written, is it written for people to read through in order, or is this more of a, man, I'm dealing with an issue on marketing, I need to see what God's Word says about that. I'm dealing with an issue on accountability, I need to deal with an issue on that. When you're writing this, or how would you suggest people get the most out of this book?
I pulled out my 2 go-to business books that I use, and I've got a copy of Good to Great, and I've got a copy of Business by the Book by Larry Burkhart, and that's kind of the Christian go-to business book of the 70s and 80s. And I looked at how I use those books, and they are highlighted, they're dog-eared, there's stuff written in the margins all the way through it. And so what I did, this is kind of structured to be whatever chapter you want to go into, because at the end of each chapter is a page or 2 that you can fill in with notes. Because I think as you like, my example would be if you're negotiating a new contract or negotiating a really serious deal, read the chapter on negotiating, see how Jacob negotiated. Don't follow his example. That's a clue. See how Abraham negotiated about Sodom. See how Moses negotiated. And then after you've negotiated, you could go back into the section to make your notes and see what helped you. So the next time you needed to negotiate, you could go back and see what pieces of that gave you some good advice and what pieces of that you can rely on in the future.
Yeah. So I'm curious for you, what chapter in here or what subject do you find yourself you keep revisiting, or maybe it was one that was the hardest to write, not because of a lack of content, just because it's an area that we chronically deal with?
You know, the chapter that's really missing in this book is a chapter on leadership. And, leadership touches every single one of these chapters in here. And I kept trying to write a chapter on leadership. And I touch on it at the end because I think King David has just some of the most phenomenal leadership stories that you can apply to your life. I talk about three of my favorite people of the Bible in leadership as kind of an aside would be Deborah and what she did with Barak. You can get out of the politics on that one if you want. And then Luke is one of my favorite biblical leaders. And so I touch on it a bunch of different places, but it's not really one chapter I did in here. It's the one chapter I haven't done yet that I kind of keep coming back to and think I still need to do better on it.
Well, that's funny because that's actually one thing I wanted to talk to you about. In chapter 11 on leadership, you mentioned how business advice found in the Bible often seems elusive because we don't think stories from 2,000 years ago have anything to do with our 21st century commerce. So what kind of advice would you give the rest of us that are wanting to look to the Bible for wisdom, business principles, the way we interact with people, when we think about some of these subject employee benefits? You've done that, you've written a book. What kind of advice would you give us?
The one thing that keeps coming back to me that I think we lack is biblical literacy. There are so many easy Bible stories that we know that we don't know we know, and that apply to business. And I can just give you one of my favorite stories is Jesus and the woman at the Samaritan well. For those who you don't know, Jesus and his disciples are traveling through Samaria, and they come up to a well. And the rest of the disciples go into town to find some food, and Jesus is tired, so he sits down at the well, and it's in the middle of the day, and a woman comes to the well to get water, and he engages her in a conversation. And there's just so many things you can pull out of that story. But what too many people have done is they've micromanaged that story so much that they're looking at, the woman has had 5 husbands, and so they focus on her divorce rate, or it's a woman and she's coming to the well in the middle of the day, so she is a certain stature and culture. But what I really see is when you look at the whole picture as a broader story, you really understand that he's talking to us about culturalism. He's talking about, he's interacting, a Jewish man interacting with a Samaritan woman in a Samaritan village, and he's not afraid of doing that, and she's not afraid of interacting with him. And so you kind of, once you have the biblical, a little bit better biblical concept of the whole story, you really get so much more out of it. And that you can pull the business principles out of that too, because that's how we want to promote diversity. That's a great example and a great story on diversity that I think we want to do. Another one that one of my favorite stories of all time, and it's in the Bible, and I just can't believe, if I was in control of a big corporation, I would make it be required reading is the parable of the trees. And most people don't know that there's parables in the Old Testament. Most people, when you say there's parables, they think, well, New Testament, parables by Jesus. And this is a parable about Gideon's youngest son, who is the lone surviving son after his other 69 brothers get slaughtered. And he teaches this lesson about, he says there's a forest, and the forest wants to elect a new leader. And so they go to one tree, and I'm going to get the trees all mixed up, so I'm going to make it up and bring it into Kansas culture, okay? He goes to the apple tree and says, we want to make you our leader. And the apple tree says, well, I'd love to be your leader, but if I'm your leader, I can't make any more apples. And he goes to the olive tree and says, we want to make you your leader. And he says, well, I'd love to be your leader, but if I was your leader, I can't make any more olives. And he goes to the grapevine and says, we want to make you our leader. And the grapevine says, no, if I'm your leader, I can't make any more grapes. And so they go to the thorn bush, who has no value, and makes him their leader. And the thorn bush catches fire and burns down the forest. And how that applies so quickly to me is what we do in my business is I take my really good designers and I make them project managers to where they're no longer designing anymore. You know, I take somebody out of what they're doing really, really good, and I promote them into something that they may not be very good at. And we do that all the time, and what a great lesson that is about how we deal with people. Yeah. You know, if they're good at something, why take them out of it unless they really want to? And it's just kind of biblical literacy that comes out of that.
I love that. Well, why don't you tell us, so we all know, where can we get the book? Tell us how much it is and where we can leave a review if we...
Yeah, absolutely. The book's available on Amazon. It's available downstairs here for sale. You can buy it at Westbow. I've got cards from Westbow Press back on the table that you're welcome to pick up, and it talks about the book. I've got my Zebedee and Sons Fishing Company business cards back on the desk, and what I really, I never intended to be a writer, and I'm just learning every day I get into this. I'm just learning so many nuances of the writing world. So when you write, unless you're a drunken movie star or a failed politician, the path you take to publish a book is you get it published, and you really don't have a publisher until you sell so many copies. And then once you sell so many copies, then, for example, on this one, Thomas Nelson might take me under their name, or maybe it even might grow all the way up to be Zondervan, which I'd like to have happen. But it's up to me to promote my book. And how that happens is I need people to connect to my Facebook page. That's the yardstick nowadays, is Facebook. And I thought I was pretty proud of the 29 Facebook friends I had until they told me that I had to have a whole lot more than that. And so what I'd urge you to do would be to go to my website. I have a blog that I'm publishing a new blog twice a week. It's all related. It's all stuff that is, I am thinking about that day when I walked into the office and I wrote about it. It's my current business issues, but it's how I'm looking at those business issues through the Bible to solve them. Some of them are after the fact, after I screwed it up and had to make some amends. I went back and said, okay, how should I have done this if I was proactively doing it? I'll be honest with you. So that's my blog. It's on ZebedeeandSonsFishingCompany.com. That's also a connection to my author's website or Facebook page. And then a book review would be, I'd love to have some on Amazon. You can just go on there and just type in a book review. It would be great.
Okay, so that's Zebedee and Sons Fishing Company, Business Advice from the Bible. It is for sale downstairs. Right here is Signs of Life. Is there any closing comments that you would have for us?
I just, one other thing that I want to comment on is I went out on a limb and I talked in this book about prayer in business. And that was probably the little bit of the most dangerous territory I went on. And I do believe that we as Christians need to pray for our business. We need to pray for the people that work for us. We need to pray for the people that we work for. And we need to pray for our clients and competition. Because I think that is the first step to really bringing our faith into the workplace. With that, thank you for coming. I really appreciate this.
We give it up for